Paul.
So good evening, everyone in the United States, and good morning, everyone in China, and have a good day in the world. Today, we are really happy. Health World Green Development webinar series number 54 will start today. So the topics is effective energy policy for decarbonization. So this webinar from last year start from coronavirus. We cannot meet each other, so we start online. So the co-host for the webinar will be have US-China Health Summit, Global Green Development Alliance, and other organizations. So I'm Xiaofeng Zhang, moderator for today, and I'm the president of the Global Green Development Alliance. So today we are really happy, invite Professor Jim Sweeney from Stanford University. So he is the founding director of the Procure Energy Efficiency Center and the professor in the management science and engineering in Stanford. Also, he is advisor for our Global Green Development Alliance. So today we also invite the honored Dr. Jinfeng Zhou, from Beijing, do the opening remark. So Dr. Jin is the vice chair and the secretary general of China Biodiversity Conservation and the Green Development Foundation. So Jin will give the 1 hour excellent speech, and after then we have other hour for the question and answer. So I will, really appreciate all our people today to hear and the participant. And Jim is really did excellent preparation. His PPT has a Chinese and English, both language. So during our 1 hour question answers, our moderator will be the Dr. George Zhou, Vice President of Global Green Development Alliance, and also has the panelist is the Professor Jia from the North China Electric Power Universities, and also has a lot of participants online. Okay, so right now we will start our first opening session. So welcome Dr. Jinfeng Zhou. He is also professor in Beijing University. Okay, welcome Dr. Zhou. Oh, your speaker 没打开。周博士的好。
非常感谢张会长和组织者今天呢组织这次会议。自从习主席在联合国宣布了中国的碳达峰、碳中和承诺之后，特别是今年4月底，习主席再次指出，各级政府和党委都要制定碳达峰、碳中和的时间表、路线图和施工图。那么各地呢，国内的所有的主要企业和各级政府都在研究能源政策。所以今天张会长请到了 James 教授这么资深的、权威的、长期的研究能源政策的专家，跟我们来分享他的心得呢，我认为是极端的及时重要，而且会我们的听众、我们的社会各界都会越来越关注。过去的一段时间呢，我陪着中国生物多样性保护与绿色发展基金会的胡德平同志、谢伯阳同志，应大同市委市政府的邀请，应中煤集团的邀请，去了山东，还有其他的很多的地方政府和企业都在 跟我们洽谈预约，讨论的核心焦点都离不开能源政策，都离不开透过能源政策达成双碳目标的策略、时间和具体方案。所以这项工作呢是极端重要的。对于中国来说呢，我们在大数字上去看，我们在应对气候目标，我们在碳中和的路上呢，还具有极端艰巨的任务。由于我们承担了大量的生产制造，由于我们的经济和科技发展还处在一个初级的阶段，所以我们在相关的碳排放的数字上和减碳的任务上，我们虽然提出了共同有区别的责任，但是呢，我们仍然积极的、努力的自主约束、自主要求，来为气候变化这个议题呢做出我们的中国贡献。中国生物多样性保护与绿色发展基金会呢，在上个世纪的末，胡德平同志就开始研究绿色发展，并经国务院批准更名为增加了绿色发展作为我们的重要的工作和任务。同时呢，我们作为一级学会呢，也在绿色发展的相关议题上积极的参与地方、国家、企业作为进行能源政策的研究、修订，以期呢，更好的完成我们达峰碳中和的目标，透过能源政策的调整来实现我们的生态保护和气候任务。那么在这样的一个特殊的时期，在这样一个国际在能源气候问题上进一步的合作，同时也进一步的增加了产业和地方的压力，在这样的一个时刻呢，我们来共同学习能源政策对于环境、对于气候问题的影响是极端重要的。我仅在此代表中国生物多样性保护与绿色发展基金会，代表谢博洋同志、胡德平同志、胡昭广同志，向组织今天会议的各方表示衷心的感谢，向张会长、向 James 教授表示衷心的感谢。希望呢，我们就此建立起这个平台，为我们企业、专家、政府制定能源政策提供积极的帮助。谢谢大家。
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Jinfeng Zhou, for the excellent opening remark. Your organization is well known in China. Actually, current a lot of active states relate protection elephant. The elephant in Yunnan make the attention for all the countries. Really, significant contribution, and we are really happy. For the green development area. We has a common sense. So right now we will get to our keynote speaker, Professor Jim Sweeney. I give the short introduction. If you talk the long introduction, will be very long. Yeah, so Jim Sweeney is a really famous professor in Stanford University. So as I know, he was the dean of the engineering economics department, Stanford, also founding director of the Procure Energy Efficiency Center, and currently professor management science and engineering, also is our advisor. So Professor Sweeney actively focuses on the economic policy and analysis for the energy and the environment, especially in energy efficiency. He is a senior fellow of the U.S. Association for Energy Economics, California Council on Science and Technology, Hoover Institute, Parker Institute for Energy, Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research. Professor Sweeney serves on the External Advisor Council of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and on California Energy Commissions. And also, he served as the editor for the 3-volume handbook of the Nature, Resource, and Energy Economics, author of the California Electricity Crisis. Also, he is the author of other famous books, Energy Efficiency, Building a Clean, Secure Economy. So Professor Sweeney earned his MIT bachelor degree in electrical engineering and the Stanford PhD in the engineering economics. Okay, so I will not spend too much time here. So right now we are warmly welcome, Professor Jim Sweeney.
Thank you, Xiaopeng, for such a gracious introduction, and ni hao, everybody. Glad to be here. I'd like to start by sharing my screen. And we'll be focusing on what I'm calling effective energy policy for decarbonization. The title doesn't say for which nation, whether I'm talking about for the United States or for China. And that's for a specific reason. I will be talking about themes which I think are relevant, highly relevant for both of our nations as we go forward in effective in policymaking for decarbonizing our nations. I'd like to start with what I think for many of us, or I think for everybody who are focusing on clean energy, we're thinking about how do you develop a sustainable energy system. And what I mean by sustainable has a few characteristics. Some of those are having to do with the efficiency of the system, how equitable it is, how fair it is. Is the energy affordable? Is there plenty of it? There's abundant, competitive, profitable. Focusing on energy. You're thinking about how do you develop a sustainable energy system. And what I mean by sustainable, somehow I'm coming back with a long lag and an echo. I'm not quite sure how that's happening. But in any event, these I'll call those issues of the economy, and the economics of energy is very important. Second, it has to do with, we would like for it to be a sustainable system, to have domestic and internationally secure, predictable sources of it, a resilience when something goes wrong, it can continue back, and a reliable source of energy. I'll call that all security issues. And third, it should be environmentally protective, particularly for the climate, because we have the fundamental problem of global climate change, but also for air quality and on water resources. I'll call that the environment. Together, I'll think of this as the energy policy triangle, that as we think about developing energy policy for either of our nations, we need to be paying attention to a balance of all three of those issues and think of the trade-offs. Today, though, I'm not going to talk about the security issues or the economic issues particularly, but the environmental issues and focus on global climate change. You've probably all seen these data on the territorial carbon dioxide emissions, the red being China, the emissions as we see growing from 1960 to now, to the data I have completely is only for 2019. Yeah, China is the first biggest emitter. US is the second biggest, and all of Europe, the 27 countries of EU together, are the third. That's what we'll call territorial carbon dioxide emissions. That's the emissions that are generated in the territory of the nation. In some sense, it's a misleading measure, because if you produce manufactured goods, say steel, and ship it to the United States, and it's used in the United States, well, should you attribute the carbon emissions to China, where it's emitted, or the United States, which wanted to use the steel in the first place? Well, that suggests that there may be another way of measuring carbon dioxide, and that is consumption carbon dioxide emissions, where you take that steel, for example, and attribute all the carbon dioxide in producing the steel that's used in the United States, not to China, but to the United States. So with laborious work, other people, not me, other people have done those calculations. And only going back to 1990, we don't have as long a data space, it still tells somewhat the same story. The carbon dioxide emissions from China, if you have a territorial, that's 10 billion tons a year. It's 9 billion if you only do the consumption calculation. And for the United States, if you use territorial, you'll calculate 5 billion. And if you have consumption, you'll have about 5.75 billion. So there's about 10%, 10 to 15% difference between these two measures. But whatever way you measure it, your country, China, my country, the United States, are the biggest emitters of carbon dioxide in the world. And so we're the two countries that are most fundamentally need to deal with the problem. So I want to focus the whole attention on dealing with this problem. And I think of 4 pathways for energy, for carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas emissions from the energy system. I'm only going to focus on the energy system. That's the dominant way we create greenhouse gas. I'm not going to pay attention to agriculture. Agriculture is another important issue. For reforestation, land use is important. But energy is bigger than everything else together. And therefore, I will focus just on decarbonization of energy system. And the framework that I think of as the 4 things that we need to do: energy efficiency, end-use substitution, low carbon energy production, and carbon capture and storage. Energy efficiency, what I mean is using less energy while still allowing our economies to grow vibrantly and without penalizing the economic welfare of the nation. So energy efficiency is using less energy, keeping the economy going. End-use substitution is moving from carbon-intensive end uses of energy to having the same end use that uses less carbon-intensive energy. That typically would mean something like moving from a gasoline-powered automobile to an electric automobile that would release fewer emissions. Low carbon energy production, that's the thing that most people think about in decarbonizing the energy system. That would be wind and solar and hydropower and maybe nuclear and the clean forces of energy. And then another one, which is less significant now, but could become extremely important at a later time, carbon capture and storage. That's using fossil fuels, but instead of releasing the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, capture it and store it permanently underground. So I'd like to talk briefly about each one of these. Energy efficiency, we see examples all around. The continuing revolution of lighting, where we have light emitting diodes that instead of using 60 watts for a given amount of electricity, they use maybe 11 watts, and that's getting smaller. Motion sensing lights and switches. When I was a child, my parents were always saying something like, "Jim, don't you ever know how to turn off the lights when you're done?" Now parents don't have to do it. The child leaves the room, the parents leave the room, the lights turn themselves off. That's very important in commercial buildings where people often don't pay attention to turn off the lights and motion sensing lights. In buildings, better insulation of buildings, high efficiency furnaces, all energy efficiency in buildings. We have a great example in refrigeration in the United States. This graph shows refrigerator energy use, and it shows the red was the average energy use per refrigerator installed in a home, going back to 1947, where it used about 375, less than 400 kilowatt hours. By the time of the energy crisis in 1974, the new refrigerator on average would use 1,800 kilowatt hours, until there was a deliberate decision in the federal government to create new technologies and promote them that would use less energy for the same amount of refrigeration, so that by now, and I don't have the most recent data, but we're down to the energy use for an average refrigerator about the same as that we had in 1947. This blue is the size of the refrigerators. Refrigerators are continuing to get larger with newer features. And so we have good refrigeration, larger refrigeration, but we use a lot less energy. These are examples of energy efficiency. One of my favorite has to do with the air transportation, airlines, data from the United States. This is the energy intensity of air travel in thousands of BTU per seat mile. This is, you ask how many seats are on the airplane, how much they fly, how much energy used. And we see from the time of the 1973-74 oil embargo, where in the, say, international or energy domestic flights, we use between 4,000 and 6,000 BTUs per seat mile. And now by 2015, it was between 2 and 2.5 BTUs. So airplanes became more efficient. We have these winglets on airplanes that are aerodynamically efficient, lighter metals and lighter bodies, more efficient engines. So all of those have led to the BTUs per seat mile being reduced by a factor of a little over 2 in those years. Perhaps more dramatically, though, is remembering commercial airlines are not in business just to fly the seats. They're in business to fly people. So you can look at the energy used per passenger mile and look at what the changes has been over time, where in the data just before the oil crisis, BTUs per passenger mile were between 10 and 11,000 per passenger mile, and now down between 3 and 4 per passenger mile. That's because the airlines have learned to keep the airlines very full through yield management. Yield management, very complex, stochastic, dynamic optimization programs that the airlines run on a daily basis that leads them to change the price of the airlines, maybe on airline tickets on an hourly basis based upon the projections, whether flights will be full or not, and have allowed the airlines to keep the capacity factor at almost 100%, and therefore led to massive amount of energy efficiency while still being able to allow people to fly across the country or across the world. Another example is at a systems level. This is very, very close to home for me at Stanford. This is the integrated campus-wide for all of Stanford heating and cooling system. It has electric chillers that chill water, and it uses the electricity to chill the water only at times when electricity is very cheap. That could be in the middle of the day where we have too much electricity in California from solar, or the middle of the night where very few people use it. We can chill water and put it in tanks. We have for emergency boilers if we need additional heating, but usually using electric. So notice that this is involving both fuel switching and efficiency. The water is put in these massive hot water and cold water tanks, and those tanks have water shipped throughout the campus for heating and cooling. But then in every building, you have heat recovery systems. So when the cold air is ejected from the building to get fresh air, and it's a hot day, that coldness is captured and put back in the water system. Similarly, on a heated building and a cold day. So we have things like this are not unique to Stanford. We have corporations and industry engineering, innovating to use less energy in order to accomplish the same ends. Here we have the electric substation that allows us to bring electricity in from other areas. Okay, second example, carbon reduction through end-use energy switching. This allows us to go from more carbon-intensive forms of energy to less carbon forms by doing the same functions. This is US data on the use of carbon dioxide emissions from the different sectors. But if you think of transportation, we have electric vehicles. These electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, each one of them release less carbon dioxide per mile driven than the equivalent gasoline fueled vehicles. You have the electric trains. We even have experimentally electric airplanes. These pods down here, unfortunately, are not places where passengers or luggage sit. Those are places where batteries sit right now. So we don't have any cargo space or any passenger space. But this is experimental. This is the beginning. So even in air transportation, we're figuring out ways that we can fuel switch to hydrogen or electricity. In the commercial, instead of cooking with natural gas, this is an inductive cooker. Here we have the heat pumps for heating and for cooling buildings. So instead of using fossil fuels, instead of using boilers to heat buildings, you can move it towards electricity. And even in industry, even in steel making, we have now electric furnaces. There's a lot of industrial processes such as this where we've automated, and the automation creates it all electric, maybe substituting more for labor. But essentially, around in China and the United States, we are finding ways of substituting for a low carbon form of energy to perform the same end uses. And most of these pictures I happen to chose from China rather than US. If I was giving this to a US audience, I could choose US pictures that did the same thing. Clean energy production. Well, most of the clean energy production techniques generate electricity. So that's one of the reasons we want a strategy of moving towards electricity, because if we think of the whole system, that's the way that's the energy generation that is easiest to decarbonize or most capable. So we have electricity generation through wind power. This is called the Ibanapa. Solar is a grid-scale solar system in a desert in California. These are all mirrors. These are all mirrors that reflect the sun and up to this focal point. And this focal point heats up water, boils the water, heats up the water, and down here is a quite conventional electric generating plant that uses steam to high temperature steam to generate electricity. But the water is not boiled and turned into steam through fossil fuels. It's turned into it by all of these mirrors reflecting the sun onto the focal point. Other electricity generation, we have like the Three Gorges Dam. We have the geysers geothermal plant. We have nuclear power plants. These are all ways that we're finding to decarbonize the generation of electricity, and these all are through clean energy production for electricity. But notice that most everything I've showed is electricity. We have fewer options for creating liquids. We have biomass that we can grow deliberately to turn into ethanol or biobutane or biodiesel. We can use renewables, wind and solar, to create hydrogen through electrolysis of water. And so there are ways to generate electricity, energy other than electricity, but these tend to be very expensive. So the ways that we're going forward tend to be in electricity, and that's why we have the idea of the end use switching towards electricity, which looks like it will be the cheapest way we can have decarbonized energy. Then carbon capture and storage. We may want to be using fossil fuels. We can enhance oil recovery by ejecting carbon dioxide into the ground. It's stored permanently, or you can just inject carbon dioxide into deep saltwater formations, saline formations, and we believe it can be kept permanently there. But there's a lot of ongoing research, and again, this is a very costly process. It's not nearly economic yet, but that's sort of the fourth pathway. Okay, from those fourth pathways, I'd like to present a quantitative framework that I like to use, other people can use for a quantitative analysis of the pathways. and it uses something called the Kaya identity. And we can decompose carbon dioxide emissions from energy consumption into 3 factors. And this is just an identity. In the sense, identity means that for every set of numbers that are internally consistent, this equation all holds, because carbon dioxide, we just say we can think of as the gross national product, that is the overall economic activity, multiplied by the energy use per dollar or per RMB of economic activity, multiplied by the carbon dioxide per use of energy. So it's just an identity, but it's a useful identity for thinking about the issues. Think about GDP as a measure of economic growth and development. In the international negotiations, there is not one country in the world that says, we want to control carbon dioxide by crushing our economy, by stopping our economy from growing. Neither China nor the US have said that. They've all said, we want to use less energy, but continue a healthy economy. So generally, policy does not try to reduce GDP. The second is energy intensity of the economy, energy per unit of GDP. That's how efficiently we use energy. And the third, carbon intensity per unit of energy, how clean is the energy? Then mathematically, since carbon dioxide emissions is a product of those, if we differentiate those, the rate of growth of carbon dioxide emissions is the sum of the rate of growth of these 3 things. So it becomes convenient to analyze the historical data and to think about what may be happening in the future. So let me relate those. Energy efficiency, which reduces the amount of energy use, that is linked to these 2 elements of the Kaya identity, GDP times energy use per unit of GDP, where energy efficiency is really the energy use per unit of gross domestic product. And use substitution, that will then lead to less carbon dioxide per unit of energy use. Clean energy production leads to less carbon dioxide per unit of energy use. And carbon capture and storage leads to less carbon dioxide per energy use. So you can link these concepts of energy efficiency, end use substitution, clean energy production, carbon capture and storage, to the 3 factors in the Kaya identity. Caveat now, some of these reductions of carbon intensity are not economically efficient. And as a policy-making process, your nation and my nation has intense debates about what of those things are most economically efficient, which will be good for the nation, which will lead to the appropriate security that you want, which leads to the distributional consequences, and those issues are crucial. So I want to use these trends to show how I use them to evaluate, at least historically, the importance of these 4 pathways. I'm going to start with the US, the carbon reduction trends, using the Kaya identity. And I plotted out the 4 things in terms of annual average rates of growth. Remember, carbon dioxide annual rate of growth will be the sum of those other 3 rates of growth. So the blue is the energy intensity of the economy. This says before the oil crisis in 1973, for those 13 years, the average rate of change was about minus 0.3%, 0.3% a year. The carbon intensity of energy use, was declining about 0.3% per year. You add those together and it's almost 0.6% per year. That would be the carbon intensity of the economy. But the US economy was growing on average 4.3%. The carbon intensity was declining about 0.6%, and therefore the carbon dioxide emissions were growing about 3.7%. So that's how you can read this graph, and you can see that was happening before the crisis. When there was the oil embargo in 1973 and oil prices quadrupled, in the United States, that's when we started paying attention to energy policy. It was a great shock to us. And what happened after that point is there was a lot of policy making, but there was also a lot of private sector activities. And if we look at each of these years, the rates of changes became very different than before the crisis. Once the US put its national attention to deal with the energy problems, these rates of change became very important. And I've grouped this by presidential administration, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, and Bush. And I stopped there for a reason, because I got to show you something different for Obama and Trump. But you notice that energy intensity of the economy was growing here, decreasing 1.5%, 2.5%, 2.75%, 2%. Now, 2% a year, when you average over 50 years, makes a very large difference in the energy intensity. As one of the things that I think is very special about how China government tends to think is, it's a long-term, everything is long-term. You don't think just year to year, you think of long-term. Well, you think about here in the US, energy efficiency at about 2% a year average for 50 years has made a fundamental change. The red is the carbon intensity of energy use. The system wasn't getting any cleaner at all, and very slowly. And then the economy was growing usually between 2 and 4% a year during this time. And so with the carbon intensity of the economy going down, declining in the order of 1.5 to 2.5%, then carbon dioxide emissions continue to increase over every presidential administration. Then during the Obama administration, something happened. And what happened is that we started cleaning up the energy system. We started a process of both renewables and moving away from coal, bringing in natural gas to squeeze out coal, and the system started getting cleaner. And so that the combination of energy efficiency and energy intensity and carbon intensity of energy use improving, we have about a 3% decline per year. But during the Obama administration, on the average, the economy grew only 1.5%. So carbon dioxide emissions declined about 1.5% a year. Now you're all guessing about what happened in the Trump administration. Surprise! In the Trump administration, the carbon intensity of energy use kept declining because the processes that had started with energy policies that happened well before Donald Trump stayed in place. The new technologies that allowed natural gas to be created and to substitute for coal stayed in place. And that although Donald Trump wanted to protect the coal industry, the economic forces were more powerful than him as president. So the system continued to, energy system continued to get better. Private sector activities kept leading to more energy efficiency, so that the carbon intensity of the economy declined on the average 4% a year during all of the Trump administration. The economy grew very slowly on the average under the Trump administration because at the end of COVID, And so the carbon dioxide emissions in the United States declined 3% a year average over the time Donald Trump was in office. So this is how you may use this as an analytical framework to interpret what happened in the history of the United States. Okay, well, we might want to use that for China. Now, I'm not organizing by presidential administrations, and I don't have data going quite as far. I get back to 1990 for China, but we have this for 5-year intervals in China. And what we see that these are some pretty big numbers. You have high growth rates, but the energy intensity of energy intensity of the economy, for most parts, declined either before 2000, and then 2000 you started really industrializing. Energy intensity of the economy was declining less rapidly, but it's still at 3% a year. And but you were not doing much, like United States, you're not doing much to clean up your energy system, like United States in the earlier years. Your economy was growing somewhere between 7% and 12% a year in real values. And so your carbon dioxide emissions, the black, were naturally increasing along with your economy. Now, just to put this on, just to compare it with the US, I have the US data now by 5 years in the same scale. So it's the same 13% minus 8%. It looks like that. So China, and some of the same patterns are the same, but China is just much bigger scale in the rates of change than in the United States, because the Chinese economy, so much is changing so rapidly in what you're doing. So you can use this same analytical framework to think about what's going on and apply it for the discussions about the future. Then finally, I said in the US, we have these last years during Obama and Trump administration, cleaning up the energy system. Well, there's a way of analyzing what was underlying the cleaning up of the energy system. You can look at the percentages of the different fuels and see how clean each one was relative to the average, and look at the factors underlying decarbonization from 2005 through 2020. Notice that almost half of the decline is because we reduce the use of coal. Coal is the most carbon intense of all of the forms of energy we use. We see natural gas growth. Natural gas is cleaner than the average of the US system, but only a little bit cleaner. So that the growth of natural gas contributes only a little bit to this. Coal is a lot dirtier than the average, so that the decline of coal makes a large difference, even though the quantity of natural gas increase was about equal to the quantity of coal decrease. Natural gas pushed them out. So if you look at blue plus the black, that is the result of deliberate action on mostly the oil companies and gas companies to find natural gas to produce that and compete with coal. And in the private sector, coal got squeezed out, and that's been half of the growth. The other important things, nuclear didn't make much difference. It didn't have much of an impact because it didn't have much growth during that time. We have growth in the biomass, wind. Solar, by the way, is it's the smallest component of it. It probably is the part that gets the most attention. But if you quantify it, solar growth has been actually quite small in decarbonizing. It's mostly, half of it is natural gas pushing out coal. Then the decline in petroleum helped. Then the biomass growth and the wind growth are the bigger factor of the renewables. So you can go through that. Okay, so that's analytical framework for quantifying it. Then there's policies. Okay, these pathways don't happen just by themselves. They happen by a combination of companies, people, NGOs, organizations helping promote this going on, and government policies. Excuse me, take a glass of water. And so if we think of these various policies and we ask what are these various pathways, what are the various strategies that can be used? And I'll just point at a couple of them very briefly, but I've color-coded them. The green means that this policy, these class of policies can encourage the particular pathway. So a carbon tax or cap and trade system can be effective in encouraging energy efficiency, end-use substitution, low carbon energy production, carbon capture and storage. Whereas a gasoline tax will lead to energy efficiency and maybe end-use substitution, because if it's more expensive to drive a conventional internal combustion engine, you're more likely to switch to electric vehicles. So gasoline tax can be helpful in both of those, but of course does nothing over here. There are so many more policy options than I've been able to list. So these are just illustrative, but in the US, we use a lot of financial subsidies. You do in China as well. Wind, solar, biomass subsidies. Notice, by the way, the subsidies, by making electricity cheaper, discourage energy efficiency. Because if energy is cheaper, there's less need for energy efficiency. So the financial subsidies discourage energy efficiency, where a carbon tax or cap and trade system will encourage energy efficiency. Where these subsidies at the same time will encourage low carbon energy production and carbon capture and storage. Very important policy is research and development, where we have direct grants and tax credits. Direct grants is the government, includes the government research institutions that are engaging in that. And those R&D and continuing R&D for China and for the United States are very fundamental to making these technologies better. And as an editorial, exchanging of technological knowledge is very important for having the advances in either country be helpful in the other country. They're helpful for the world. In the US, we use a lot of regulations. You do too in China. Automobile fuel efficiency standards, appliance efficiency standards. If you look at in the United States, among the energy intense end-use appliances, those appliances that use a lot of energy, about between 80 and 90% are subject to energy efficiency regulations in the United States, which are based upon doing a benefit cost test in order to force more energy efficiency. In the US, direct action on federal assets. In China, there's federal assets, which direct assets. One of the things I point out now is that there's an environmental community that's trying to restrict drilling contracts, restrict oil and gas pipeline permits. I indicate that those probably has a very, very small impact on the amount of carbon, because if you don't get natural gas moving through, say, the XL pipeline, it will move at a higher cost by railroad lines. And so many of the restrictions that environmental communities are pushing after probably had very little impact when it's just restricting drilling permits. But on federal lands, you can have wind and solar contracts. How the federal government manages buildings makes a difference for those buildings, but it creates a model for other people to see and creates opportunities. And then there's the behavioral interventions, one that we've studied a lot here at Stanford, information strategies, nudges. I'm going to talk a little more about those corporate disclosure rules that can make a difference for each one of these. So let me just spend the last few minutes I have to just talk a little bit about some of these pricing strategies aimed to motivate people and corporations to move along these various pathways. Pricing strategy, carbon tax or cap and trade. You in China are studying a type of cap and trade system for the electric utilities first, maybe later for the whole economy, right now just for the electric utilities, that are not trading carbon permits, but carbon attributes, or carbon intensity permits, but has some of the same characteristics of cap and trade. Many economists, including myself, would like to see either a broad cap and trade in the United States or a carbon tax. Those can be effective for all the pathways. They increase the price of all energy intensive products, and therefore people use them less. And it changes the production processes. Companies decide they want to move away from energy intensive production. But because you have the future opportunity for getting more profitable products with R&D, and encourage research and development into low energy, low carbon products. And also it encourages company managers to adopt processes that waste less energy, particularly if energy is more expensive. Then in a corporation, there's an incentive to get your managers to use less energy. Specific tax like a gasoline tax has some of the same effects, motivate purchases of more fuel efficient vehicles. It motivates reduction of driving and encourages people to move to other cars. So that's pricing strategies, I believe, for your country and mine, should be an important part of the policy mix. Information strategies, we've used a lot in the United States, but you have as well in China. Labeling of appliances, so lifetime energy costs. When you buy a refrigerator in China, you can find out how much energy is used, same as in the United States. That causes people to pay attention to energy use. If you didn't tell them how much energy a refrigerator was going to use, they probably wouldn't know, and therefore there would be less incentive to buy the energy efficient refrigerators. In the US, we have commercial building performance rating and rating disclosures. So when you're leasing out a building or selling a building, in the commercial space, you've got to tell them how energy efficient that building is, and that helps changes in negotiation of purchase terms, and therefore encourages owners of the building to do energy efficiency. Smart metering and feedback. We have smart electric metering, and we can give people feedback about their energy use. So it's one of those adages, anything that you can't measure, you'll never manage. So smart meters help them measure it, as does building information management systems. It allows managers better information. We use nudges a lot. Nudges are ways of allowing people to make their own choice, but pushing them in one direction, nudging them. In the US, in most utilities, when you get your bill, you'll see a comparison of how much electricity you use in comparison to that of your neighbors. That is, if you use a lot more electricity than your neighbors, which is fairly equivalent buildings. I hope my wife answers that phone quickly. Okay, let me turn the volume. Okay, I can't hear it now. Okay. If you use more electricity on your bill, will be a big yellow frown on your bill. And if you use less than your neighbors, a big smile on your bill. It sounds silly, but that, excuse me. Wes, I can't talk with you now. I'll call you later. I'm giving a seminar. Bye-bye. That was my son calling. I'm on one phone versus the other. That leads to about 2% on the average reduction in energy use. Just those little smiles or those frowns in comparison. Within corporations, energy use reporting is part of the performance evaluations, motivates workers and managers to pay more attention. If you have to report out energy use to your boss as he or she is evaluating you for a raise or not, and that's part of the criteria, well, then you're motivated to use less energy. We have public interest radio and television alerts. Some labeling like the Energy Star is like an implicit endorsement of energy use. People will say, hey, if it's the Energy Star, it's a suggestion, it's good. So this is often when things don't have a lot of financial consequences for the individual, then nudges are very useful for changing people's behavior. Or if you make it so it wouldn't have had many financial consequences. For example, the manager managing energy use in his or her area of operation, and you make it so that it does have financial consequences, that is, it's part of its performance or her performance review, then nudges are very important. So the nudges and information, these are the type of labeling that we see in the United States, which tells you if you buy a car, not just how much it's going to cost, but the annual cost of fuel at the average price of gasoline, because behavioral studies tell you if you have the information in front of you when you make a decision to buy the car, then that information can be relevant. Same for buying refrigerators. So we go back, I want to end it up with these slides. I find it useful for me as I think about what can happen in the US, and I hope you can think about what may be useful in China, to think of this sort of matrix. What are the policy options that are being considered? Which of these pathways they make a difference for? Try to start quantifying them using something like the Kaya identity. and then do the economic evaluation of them to see the impact of them on the economic performance, as well as to do a security evaluation, how much how secure the energy system becomes with the various changes and how not less secure it may be. I don't have time in this seminar to talk about it, about all of those characteristics. But if you think about the combination of the energy policy triangle as these three characteristics, then there's 4 pathways that we might want to think about of how we get cleaner energy. We can think about a framework for evaluating them quantitatively, historically, and making judgments for the future using a Kaya identity, and then look at the relationship between different policy options, interventions, and these pathways. You can start becoming, I think, more systematic as an energy policy analyst and helping make good decisions to move China and the US together forward to help dealing with this really fundamental environmental issue of our day, energy, global climate change. And on that, I will stop and thank you, Shishay, for being such a good audience.
Thank you very much, Jim. You know, the excellent presentation, actually. So I see the feedback from our audience. They say, oh, your PPT have a Chinese. And they say, very valuable, this, this talk, include a lot of information. Okay, thank you again. So right now we will go our second part of today's webinar will be the Q&A, question and answer. So I will introduce our, moderator, Dr. George Zhou. He is the Vice President of the Global Green Development Online. And also welcome, we have, panelist, He Ping Jia, she is the Associate Professor from North China Electrical Power and University. So, So maybe the Professor Jia, you can talk.
Thanks for the organization of Global Green Development Alliance and the invitation from Professor Xiaofeng Zhang. It's a great honor to have this opportunity to learn from Professor Sweeney and have this opportunity to exchange with all you guys. It's really interesting topic of effective energy policy for decarbonization. I think this presentation is really, really good and with both Chinese and English, and it focuses more on the micro energy analysis. Actually, since I am in the North China Electric Power University, and I am focused more about the research on power systems. Actually, I would like to share something about virtual power plants in power system. Just allow me a few minutes to introduce the virtual power plant practice in China. I will share the screen, share my slide. Is that okay?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Actually, I would like to share 2 virtual power plant practice in China. The first one is in North Hebei province. Here is Beijing, and there are almost 5 cities around Beijing in Hebei province. And here we construct a virtual power plant to to aggregate a lot of commercial in the industrial loads, and also distributed PVs to in the power system, and as we can see, we have lots of distributed energy resources. Like here we have a thermal storage electric boiler, and industry commercial load, and air conditioner, energy storage, and distributed PV, and also lots of including the smart buildings. And there is a total capacity of almost 160 megawatts. And the total adjustable capacity is about 40 megawatts. And here, this is an overview of this virtual power plant. And also we have the virtual power plant has operated from December 29 to August 2020. And it operated for about 5 months. And here is the adjusted capacity for the virtual power plant. And also we have the upper picture shows the real operation, like the real power when the power plant operates. And we can see the blue line here. The blue line is the wind power, and the green line here. The green line is the basic load. And when the VPP operates and operates here, the orange line is the actual load when after the VPP operates. As we can see, during the from the when at the time of from 1 to 7 or 8, and like in the very low, and after the VPP operated, actually the load increased here. And as we can see, during the peak load in the afternoon, in the evening, and we postponed the peak load here. So we can now with the operation of VPP, we can promote the consumption of new energy. Here is the wind power. Here is all about my introduce about the VPP practice in North Hebei province. And also I would like to share another VPP practice in Shanghai. Actually, Shanghai has operated three VPPs. Here I will introduce one VPP here. And this VPP is operated in the Huangpu district in Shanghai city. It aggregates about 100 commercial buildings to like the building, the air conditioners in these buildings, including the water chillers and electric boilers and power lighting. In the middle, the table lists the potential. Like we have when we want to construct a VPP, so we have to know how many resources we can get to construct this VPP. So here is a potential forecast. It's according to the investigation, we can get there are about here 2.2 nearly 3 million kilowatts. It's accounting for nearly 9% of the city's total load. So there are lots of there are the large potentials for the VPP resources. So maybe with the development of smart grid and smarter infrastructures, so maybe the VPP will further increase. And here is where I have named 1, 2, 3 three real operations for the VPP in Shanghai. So the first one is a peak shaving and very filling demand response. They are the cost. So when it's kind of the VPP operator will send a signal to its customers to let them use or cut down their loads, and so the government will pay the cost to these customers, and the cost was about 7 million Chinese yuan, and this is the first one demand response, and on December 2019, and we launched another special demand response during the peak period in the winter. There were 4 VPP operators in this power transaction, and aggregated over 200 customers with a total load of 87 megawatts for 2 hours. And in the last year, in the 2020, on the June 2020, also we have a VPP participant in the value filling demand response. So as we can see in Shanghai, in the VPP demonstration in Shanghai is a demand response, and we will have good potential to development. So this is all what I share about a virtual power plant in China. Yeah.
Thank you. That shows a little bit about what we can do with a combination of good information technologies, smart metering, and a system perspective that allows you to figure out intertemporal optimization. So it's some very nice examples you've just shown.
So, and I also get some questions to learn from your presentation. So actually I get 4 questions. Is that okay? The first one is I will
maybe you get out of okay.
Yeah. Okay. The first question is for the end user substitution or the end user energy switching, clean energy is supposed to be utilized. So since we can use clean energy to generate electricity, and then we can use this electricity, so does that mean we should use more electricity in the end user energy?
Yes. As you do more substitutions, say to electric vehicles and electric arc furnaces for making steel, you'll use less direct use of fossil fuels and more electricity. So yes, you use more electricity. Now, if that electricity is very dirty, that is, if it is generated mostly with coal, you don't help yourself a very large amount.
Yeah.
If that electricity is generated mostly with wind and solar at the margin, you help a lot.
Yeah.
So this is a part of the system which is non-linear. The benefits of the end use swapping is much greater if you have more clean energy production and less dirty energy production. But absolutely, you use more electricity then.
But you know, 100% clean energy in the power system seems impossible now. It's just my opinion, because we all know that for example PV or solar power or wind power, they are stochastic, or they are not easy to forecast and not easy to control. So it will bring lots of so the reliable and secure operation of power system we will do more to guarantee the secure operation of power systems.
Right.
Like your triangle in the secure economic.
Look, I fully agree with you. Oh, there's over a range of getting a cleaner and cleaner system, which you can have more and more wind and solar without having any effect on it. When you get up to a majority of it coming from intermittent sources, like wind and solar, you create security problems unless you balance it off with something else that can compensate for the intermittent nature of it. And one of the ways you compensate it is either three ways. You talked about one of them yourself. The energy, the load management, where at times when there's less energy from the renewables, you have the users of it cut back in use of energy. So that's one way. Second, you do it through storage, batteries or pump storage. But third, you'd use it by managing your your hydropower system.
Mm-hmm.
It's the optimal way of using a hydropower system is generally not as baseload power. Generally, for the given amount of water you have stored behind the reservoir, if you release the water and generate it at times when electricity is the highest value, and only minimally release water through the dams when electricity is the least value, you create most value for the system and you have most impact on the system. So there's a complementarity between hydropower systems and wind and solar, because hydropower systems can partially compensate for the intermittent nature. They said batteries are a more expensive way of doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I believe that getting to 100% renewable
Mm-hmm.
in our country is going to be very challenging, and I'm not sure it's the right thing to do. Many advocates of the renewables are arguing in favor of 100% renewables for electricity. I'm somewhat dubious about whether that's going to work and still maintain the security and the good economic issues. And it may be even more challenging in China than in the United
Mm-hmm.
States. I don't know for sure. So I agree with you.
So yeah, because you know, hydropower, the location. So we have a lot of power water here, so we can get the hydro power generation plant. So it will be more challenging. Yeah. So
right, and how much you can move depends upon how much you invest in the transmission lines and whether you have AC or DC transmission line. There's all of that electrical engineering that's beyond my knowledge base, but if you're going to use a hydropower in order to increase or decrease the amount of electricity to compensate, then you need to invest in more transmission lines to move that power.
Yes, yes. So I have get a second question.
Yes.
Yeah. The Kaya identity has been widely used for analyze the lots of variations in the carbon emissions. So because I have never used this equation before, and can you introduce something? Is there any limitations when we use the Kaya identity to make the carbon emission analysis?
Is there any, I missed one word. Is there any what?
Limitation, like disadvantages.
Well, yeah, the limitations are it only gives you so much information. I mean, as you see, it's an identity.
Mhm.
It's an identity that it's always true, because it's, let me go back to the identity just to make sure we talk about the same thing. Okay, if I share the screen, you notice that if you cancel terms, GDP cancels here and it's got energy. Energy cancels there, and while you have a CO2 on both sides. So it's always true. You know that if you're making projections, these things are interactive. That is, the greater the amount of economic growth you have, the more your economy is changing, and therefore the easier it is to have change the energy intensity. And the more your energy system's expanding, the more you can be creating clean energy, and so the greater the impact on the carbon intensity. So if you're using this as a model of the future, the limitation is, even though these are three products multiplied by one another, they are not independent of one another. They interact in that way. And you can sort of see it in the Chinese graph here. Part of the reason you could have so much energy intensity changes over time is because your economy was growing very rapidly. So one limitation about using it in projection and analyzing into the future is you have to realize that there are interdependencies. When you use it for analyzing the past, well, the data will always be correct, but it will hide information. That is, if you look at this information on say on cleaning up of the energy system, it doesn't tell you how you cleaned it up. And you need something like this. You need a separate analysis to tell how you cleaned it up, what mix of energy in order to do it. So it's a useful tool. It's a useful conceptual framework. It doesn't tell you everything. And when you use it going forward, you have to recognize the interdependency between them.
Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you for introduction. Yeah. So I get the third question. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think we need to get opportunity to others.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, maybe
sure,
you can wait. So that now we welcome our moderator for the question and answer part is Dr. George Zhou. So George, open your microphone.
Okay, thank you, Xiaofeng. Yeah, I think we already have seen Professor Sweeney's presentation, great, very informative, and also we have already got some questions from Professor Jia. So now let's have some more questions and maybe some from the audience as well. So in terms of the presentations from Professor Sweeney, I do have some questions and related to the talking about 4 pathways and energy efficiency and use substitution and low carbon energy production and carbon capture and storage. So of these 4 pathways, which one do you think we have more policy and then will be more cost effective in terms of decarbonize the society?
And yes, and let me put up these 4 pathways again. I think what we can see from the Kaya identity is that for China and for the United States, historically, energy efficiency has been the most important component of decarbonization. If you here, let me just let me adjust this one moment to give up from this. This energy efficiency has been the most important, and if you look at the Kaya, let me go forward to the Kaya identity. We see that over a long period of time, the reason the carbon intensity of the economy has declined for most of the time is mostly energy intensity of the economy. That's the energy efficiency pathway. It's not all energy efficiency, but because some of the actions have been not cost effective, so I wouldn't call it energy efficiency, but it's close to energy intensity. So the blue has been most of the things that gave us to the green, the carbon intensity of the economy. It's been very little cleaning up of the energy system. So far, energy efficiency has been more important than all of those other things that are on the supply side of the overall economy. But as you see right now, in recent years in the United States, cleaning up of the energy system has been roughly as important as changing the energy intensity of the economy, have been almost important. So that all of those things together on the supply side of the market, all of these together, mostly these two together, have been in the last 10 years or 15 years about as important as energy efficiency. So these are catching up to energy efficiency. And as I talked about earlier, that there's an interaction between end-use substitution and low carbon energy production. End-use substitution isn't very effective unless you have low carbon energy production in the electricity. Carbon capture and storage so far has been totally insignificant. It has had no impact quantitatively. It's had some impact, but it's so small I can't measure it. However, I have hope that research and development and doing different techniques can make this important. But I think at the end of the day, what will be most important going forward is energy efficiency, and is about equal to the combination of end-use substitution and low carbon energy consumption. These two together probably in the future will have roughly equal significance with energy efficiency, depending upon the policy you use. I mean, depending upon what policies are undertaken and how the corporations keep operate under the economic incentive. But that's speculation. That's just a guess on my part.
Okay, thank you. That's very good information. Actually, in the recent years, I personally, as a consumer, experiencing the very high, high percentage use and use substitution and low carbon energy production. For example, a lot of us already driving electric cars, right? Instead of gasoline cars. So, okay, and
but let me, before you get a question, if you move to an electric car, then you still are releasing carbon dioxide based upon the generation of electricity. And if in China, a lot of that electricity is generated from using coal, you are still clean. It's still cleaner using electric vehicle. When you do the numbers, it's still cleaner using electric vehicles, but not a lot cleaner.
Right, right.
If you have a car that's gasoline fueled, and now you go to a more fuel efficient car that uses only half as much gasoline, you actually cut the use of carbon dioxide roughly in half. So now if you're in California, where at the margin most of the electricity use is coming from renewables, then moving to electric vehicle makes a really big impact relative to what it would do in China. Okay, but go on.
No, yeah, thank you. Yeah, actually, because energy efficiency, actually, this is not a very new term, right? People kind of like already used to energy efficiency, but these new cars, people have some, okay, this is something new, right? So actually, yeah, I agree with your point that actually energy efficiency probably is the most important thing that nowadays we don't pay much attention to. Actually, very important. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, because energy efficiency often is boring. It's boring to say I've insulated my home and I turn the lights off when I don't need to put LED. Very boring. It's not as exciting as putting up a solar cell on your house, even though the energy efficiency may in fact be making more of a difference.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. The second question is, when we're talking about all these policies, you have a nice picture showing all the different policies, their impact on the four pathways. So the current policies, for example, in China and in the US, so which one policy do you think is most important and most cost-effective right now? Whether a carbon tax or the money subsidy for the clean energy production, which policy right now so far got the most results?
In China or the United States? I can answer better for the United States than for China.
Yeah, in the US, yeah.
Okay. In US, let's see, did I share the correct screen? Wait a minute.
Yeah,
let me. Okay. And first, we don't have a carbon tax in all of the United States. We do have in California and some of the Western states. So we do not have one. So that hasn't had make effect. I believe that a carbon tax will be extremely important, but is politically unpopular.
Right.
So if you get, so that if you have something that'll make a big difference, but it won't ever happen, then it's useless. So I'd like to see a carbon tax, and I think that would have a pervasive effect, but I would never want that to be the only strategy. In the US, in the quantification we've had, the automobile fuel efficiency standards, more efficient, probably have had more effect than any other single thing in the in the US policy by reducing the fuel efficient, reducing the use of fuel by automobiles. In 1973, the average car on the road got 12.5 miles per gallon. Now the average car gets almost 30 miles a gallon. That means half as much carbon dioxide emissions per mile that you drive the car. That's probably been the biggest single effect. The other thing that I don't know whether this is as big or not, but it's right up there as one of the biggest, is what we've done in research and development for creating new technologies. Government research and development was was what created the light emitting diodes, was what created the more energy efficient refrigerators. It was underlying a lot of the research that allowed us to go to electric vehicles. So fundamental research and development has been really important as a policy tool in order to allow things to move forward. The financial subsidies have been important for the growth of wind, solar, and biomass, but you saw the data that I showed you, that there's still a very small fraction of the economy, of the cleaning up of the system. So notice that they have been about as half of all of the things that cleaned up the energy system, and only in the last few years is cleaning up the energy system half of the reduction in energy use. So they may be the effect of them in total may be a quarter of the changes that we've gotten, and only a little of that is caused by the government subsidies. So there's been important but less important. These behavioral interventions, I think where they've been important is in corporate commitments. Behavioral strategies within corporations have changed how people manage corporations, how much energy efficiency in their buildings, and how they're striving for more clean energy system. And those behavioral interventions in corporations have been important. That's about the best guess I can make so far.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, actually, the gasoline car fuel efficient, that is very important because the CO2 emission in transportation, probably that's the number one source of CO2 emission, right?
In California, 40% of the CO2 emissions, 40%, comes from transportation.
Yeah, okay, yeah, okay, yeah.
And most of that's cars and trucks.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In the US, it's less. It's more like a third of them. Third of the US is from transportation.
Yeah, I saw two numbers. Actually, 29% from transportation, 28% from energy production. Yeah, one number.
Yeah, the China numbers are different from the US, but yeah, I can flip through this quickly. This is US as a whole: transportation, electricity generation, industry, agriculture, commercial, residential. So that's in China. Industry is a much greater proportion of this. Transportation is smaller. Electric generation, industry is much bigger in China.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, another question. Yeah, another question I think is from our audience. The question is that so in these days, and what do you think of energy storage role in the current U.S. Power system? So in terms of decarbonization and using more green energy, and what do you think of the role of energy storage will play?
It's very expensive.
Yeah, right.
But if you get to large portions of your electricity being from intermittent sources like wind and solar, then you will need storage, or else you have a limit on wind and solar. Ping's presentation, I think, showed, I think there was some significant amount of storage that was in the virtual energy plants. And you can see what she was talking about is the importance of storage. So storage is very expensive, but very important. Now, short-term storage, day to day to make is a lot cheaper than long-term storage. That is, if you're storage for a whole season, that's much more expensive than storage for day versus night. The way you think about it is batteries and many storage facilities, the biggest cost is the capital cost. If you have storage for store energy, electricity from times where you generate a lot, where the sun's shining brightly, to use late in the day when there's not as much sunshine, then you charge the batteries and uncharge them about 365 days times a year. So that means the capital cost in a year can be divided by 365 times to get it the cost per charge, because you're going to do it 365. If you're charging it up for storage now to be used 6 months later, and you only do it once a year, the capital cost has to be amortized over one time. So the capital cost is much higher. So that long-term storage is more expensive. So long-term storage you won't do with batteries. Long-term storage you'll probably do with hydrogen. That you can generate the hydrogen, and the cost is the operating cost of generating hydrogen. And then you put it in a tank and you can store it for a long time cheaply in a tank. So that those options may be important for long-term storage using hydrogen and short-term storage using batteries. But it's still, so storage is very important, but it's very expensive. So here's a place where a lot of research and development is needed in order to bring down the cost of both long-term and short-term storage.
Right. Yeah. I know a lot of companies are doing this kind of research. Yeah.
I have one question, maybe just related to the storage.
Okay.
So Jim, thank you very much for the full pathway for the decarbonization. So actually, for the real case study for the Stanford Energy Innovation System, we got a lot of people visit, and so right now I would get your feedback. For this system, I believe they combine the maybe first three pathway.
Yeah.
So they have energy efficiency and under user, decarbonization, and also use they buy the solar from the other place, right, for the Nevada. So could you give us, some more information regarding Stanford's energy innovation system?
Yes, let me get the picture of it up.
Yeah, this system is storage use the water. They not use the chemical. So this is the different the way for the energy storage.
Okay.
I feel is worth to study. Yeah.
So you're right. This is all three of those together in one system. But this is not long-term storage. This is short-term storage. So that you're heating and cooling the water at times of day when there's a lot of energy, electricity, and it's cheap. And then you're putting in these big tanks so that you're not trying to store the electricity, you're just trying to store hot water and cold water. The red is the hot water tank, the gray is the cold water tanks. So you're storing it that way so that you're converting it to the low energy the cold and the hot water, and you're doing it in ways that when time and electricity is fairly cheap. The other thing you're doing is you don't have to heat up all the water because of the heat recovery in the buildings. The water that comes back from the pipes is already very warm. So then you have now a heat recovery system from the water that's being returned, and the heat recovery system from the returned water is used to either speed up the go into the overall system. So you have then now made sure your heating and cooling is through the hot water and the cold water, but that's heated and cooled through a little electricity. So you fuel switched well, cooling was always electric because there was always air conditioning. But heating was using natural gas often. Now you switched it to electricity by using this system. Because you have the heat recovery, it's a lot more energy efficient in doing that. And then, as you said, that there's electricity is being purchased from solar, so it's a clean energy production. So this system really represents all three pathways. All, as you very wisely point out, all three pathways are integrated into the thinking. And that's the sort of thing that can happen in a lot of places other than in Stanford, and a lot of places in China other than Stanford. It takes sort of a temperate climate. It doesn't work very well in very cold climates or very hot climates, but in more temperate climates, it has a lot of potential.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good, good question answer. And yeah, the other several other questions. Actually, one question is that talking about energy efficiency. So when we are promoting energy efficiency devices, do you expect to have people change their lifestyle or behavior? For example, setting up your AC temperature a certain degree higher than the normal. Do you think to have that?
I mean, that's one thing that people can do. And if it becomes very expensive to heat or cool your building, then you'll heat it less and cool it less. So that will be a normal price response. For the things that I've looked for, I don't think we've had a lot of that doing without. We've mostly done the things more efficiently. Like we haven't decided to not light our homes. We're now lighting it with light emitting diode lamps instead of incandescent lamps. So we're using less electricity. We've not decided to watch television less, although it may have been good to watch it less, but we have. But the televisions we buy now are much more energy efficient. They use LEDs for backlighting or other very efficient technologies. So the television you use now uses an awful lot less. Air conditioning has gotten more efficient. So in the United States, for the most part, there's continued growth of the use of air conditioning, and people don't adjust very much of the temperature. They could if they want to save money, but it's mostly buying technologies that give the same service but using less energy. That's been the dominant way that we've had more of the energy efficient. But, you know, of course, there is a little bit of that. With a high gasoline price, you drive less. But then when you have fuel efficient cars, you drive more.
Yeah.
And so there in automobiles, it's about 20% effect. If you make cars about 10% more efficient, people drive about 2% more. So the energy use is down by only 8%.
Okay.
So in that case, the energy efficiency didn't stop people from driving. In fact, probably encouraged people to drive more.
Okay. So
George, maybe you like our, you know, the participant like CC and Edward, you know, they sent question.
Yeah, I will get it. I have one more question.
Then each one get one question.
One more question actually. For the energy efficiency, so what are the policy challenges and the technology challenges? Yeah, this also relate to the energy efficiency.
Energy efficiency is not just one thing. It's so many different things. It's what we do in our homes, what we do in our factories, what we do in the government agencies. So I think there's two challenges. One, you've got to have the right technologies available. And so that's research and development, having more refrigerators available and having more efficient refrigerators available, more efficient cars. So it's having the right technologies available, but then it's getting people to use those technologies. So right now, we don't have 100% penetration of LEDs into homes. Still, a lot of people use LEDs, partly because they don't understand the benefits of it, partly because, well, mostly I think because they don't understand or they haven't thought about. So one of the challenges is this information behavior, having the population learn about this. I say educated about it, but it's not that people just need general education. I had once a case where I was giving a seminar in front of a group of financial managers. Their job was financial management for people in basically stock market and so forth. And I was talking with one of the people afterwards about, he said, well, he's starting to put LEDs in his house. I said, well, starting to? Why not? He said, well, when the old ones burn out, I put in new LEDs. And I made him go through a calculation that showed him that if he took away old incandescent light and replaced it with a light emitting diode, he'd pay for the whole cost in 2 months. And he said, oh my God, I don't know why I've waited. Well, these are a very smart financial manager. So I think that in a lot of energy efficiency, because it's boring, a lot of people don't think about what you can do. And because it's invisible, a lot of people don't think of what they can do. So the challenge is first technology, and then getting the behavioral responses so people actually do the thing that's actually in their own interest.
Okay, thank you. Another question from CC, our association, and her question.
So maybe you like Cici to ask herself.
Oh, CC. CC. Oh, you're here. Okay, CC. Yeah, you can ask directly to Sweeney. Yeah.
Thank you, George. Hi, Professor Sweeney. So I'm a high school student in the Bay Area. I have a question regarding energy production. So since natural gas and biomass are not completely renewable, but yet solar and wind are very intermittent intermittent sources of energy, which form of energy production do you think we should be probably invested in the most and will be the most, I guess, environmental friendly, secure, reliable in the long-term direction?
Wow, that is a hard question. I think ultimately, we're going to have some amount of biomass because we're going to always want some liquids for many of the vehicles. While you can have electric airplanes, I think the energy density of electricity versus the energy density of the chemical energy you can have in a liquid fuel is so much greater. So I think that we're going to have some of that for the transportation system. I think for the heavy trucks, we're going to have hydrogen. How we're going to generate that hydrogen, I don't know, whether it's going to be electrolysis or whatever. I don't know. But for most of the electricity, we're going to have, I believe, a combination of solar and wind, and we're going to have hydropower still in there. I think nuclear power in the United States is going to slowly disappear unless there's some technological advances that allow us to get much cheaper nuclear power than we have now. So nuclear power would be great if we could get it much cheaper than it is now. And I'm not convinced that we're going to be able to have that happen. So I think if we're looking way down the road, after I'm gone, after my children are gone and my grandchildren are gone, maybe your grandchildren are there, then I think it's going to be dominantly renewables as the biggest form of but there will be some of these liquid fuels, and there may be nuclear if the technological advances that people are working on do come about. But here's what I can say when I give you that guess. I've been wrong so many times in my life that I wouldn't invest most of your savings on that recommendation that I told you.
Okay.
Okay, Cici.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. Okay, thank you, Cici's question.
Yeah, Cici is the high school student.
Yeah.
Well, where are you going to high school, Cici?
I'm currently in Saratoga High. I'm a rising senior.
Okay, and then you're going to go to college next, right?
Yeah.
Where do you want to go to college?
Stanford.
Okay, that's a good choice. That's the right answer.
That's good. Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, another question from Edward Chen. Edward, are you there?
Yeah, Edward will be the Stanford student, Jim.
Oh,
The master admitted by Stanford will come soon.
oh, in which department, Edward?
Yeah, Edward.
Edward, your question. Edward, I saw you unmuted yourself. Right. Can you hear us? Okay, I don't know, maybe something wrong with the speaker. So let me read his question. His question is that China will implement a carbon trading market. So, if they open up this national market, so what is the most challenging thing here in this huge market like China?
Okay, first, in China, it is definitely important to know it's not a national market. It's only for electric generation. Second, it is not a carbon cap and trade market, but it's a trading of intensity credits, so that if your carbon, if you're given those credits in proportion to the electricity you generate. So if you generate more electricity, you get more credits. And the amount of credits you get depends upon which technologies you use. If you get coal, you have a coal plant, you get more credits that you can use than if you have your hydro plant. So the system is designed has much less incentives for having technology that it is cleaner. It does have some incentives, but it has much less incentives than a cap and trade system. It also doesn't have any incentives to work with your customers for energy efficiency, because if you have a lot of energy efficiency and sell less electricity, you're given fewer credits. So the system is being studied carefully by Professor Larry Goulder in the economics department. He's been studying that carefully, and he knows more about it than I do. But it is not quite a cap and trade system, even for the electric generating system. So if they expand that nationwide, I think they're going to have to go to much more like a real cap and trade system rather than an attribute market system the way they did. There may be the other challenges are almost all the generating plants are state-owned enterprises. And they have sort of a soft budget constraint, so that financial incentives like that are less powerful when you have a soft budget constraint with a state-owned enterprise. Now, some of them are owned by municipalities or provinces, but there's still, you still have some of the issues. So that's the challenge in how to implement it through state-owned enterprises, given that the system is in itself designed to be less effective than a real cap and trade system. That's, I'm trying to say that gently.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, state-owned enterprise are a big part of all the companies in China. Yeah. I think that's important. Yeah. Okay, I think it's already over 9. Xiaofeng, I think. Let me see if we have no more questions. Okay, I think we have for like 2 hours already. Xiaofeng, I'm back to you. I think that's all for the question and answers. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So yeah, thank you, the professor. So we just feel time is flying. We will have more questions, I believe. However, we already got 2 hours. Thank you for the excellent presentation and a lot of interesting stories, histories, and a very rich combination of all the 4 pathways for the decarbonization. So anyway, so I think our participants and panelists will be really enjoy tonight. But for the time limit, we just stop today. Maybe in the future, the coronavirus, after then we can open the camps. Will really, come to the, we can really meeting together and so on. So that will be the excellent in the future.
Yeah, I look forward to be able to talk about some of these things, maybe even a longer time, but in Chengdu or Shanghai or Xi'an or even Beijing. Hirping, I gave a talk at your institute a couple of years, at your university a couple of years ago, and maybe I could give another talk there. So it's
Yes,
it's much more fun doing it in China and seeing people as three-dimension figures rather than the two-dimension figures of Zoom. So I look forward to that.
We will have that day.
Yeah, so also thank you for the Professor Jia, so the North China Electric Power University. So she did a very well preparation for her introduction, some case study in China. So I think we have some more picture, not only talk United States, we have China, and maybe in the future, invite someone from Europe together. So, so this is a very good webinar. We organize every week, Friday night, and continued over a year. So this is the Healthy World Global Green Development series. So anyway, so thank you everyone, and also thanks George and Xixi and Edward and all the participants and our volunteers. They really prepared, a lot of works, and the people can look the video, broadcast, use the Baidu or other things. Also, thanks for the Dr. Jinfeng Zhou, from the Green Development Foundation. So anyway, so we have excellent panel and the forum today. So we will look forward in the future.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
next week is the July 4th. So have a nice holiday, everybody. So we will know webinar next week, and we will continue after July 4th holiday.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Good one. Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.